let's get things going. Alright, back at it, streaming again, doing some programming. Today is sort of a learning and practicing kind of day. And today, what I actually want to do is work on learning how to properly work with and write unit tests, maybe beyond unit tests, some generative tests, and generally just practice thinking about how to write tests that are useful in my programs. So I'm going to get going with that. So I have here, I have to open up my files and get going, but I can show that off in a minute. So let me just finish writing out just today the little notes about what I'm going to be doing. So I have this RBG random background generator project, kind of a trivial little thing that still produces a result, and I want to write tests into that bit of code, and that'll basically be what I do. So Clojure test dependency into RBG deps.eden. Figure out good way. No, that's not what I want. Write tests inline in org file, tangle to test namespace. Find appropriate way to run tests in the REPL. But before any of this, play around with some basics in the REPL. Follow the guide here, this guide. There it is. So that's basically what I'll be doing. So in order to do that, let me open up the file dev rbg.org here, right? Before I we've got to shrink this a little bit. Sure. This can be never quite enough room for all the text on the screen. A little bit of a error there, but whatever, that's fine. Should all be okay. Right, so do I even need to add it as a I don't think I need to add it as a deps. We'll find out. If I let me do a test. I'll make a namespace for we'll do namespace RBG. What's a good name for that? All right, let's see if there's a good example. What might be a good, I know, let's go to Instaparse GitHub here. I suspect that this has good runner. This is a tangent for a moment. Okay, so there's a test runner here, I guess. Test report, run tests. It's pretty cool. Test runner, maybe that's useful. But before I look through there, let me look at test here. Okay, so they have a file, or a folder I should say. So there's the root of the project, then a folder test, then the project folder name, and then they have all of the namespaces underscore test. So that would mean that I could make the namespace here. Let me actually open up my notes. Notes. Clojure test-driven development. So, setup. Clojure has clojure.test. Unit testing framework. Clojure script has similarly has cljs.test. Typically projects will write tests in their own namespace. One test namespace per namespace in the project. So for example, I don't need to double space that. For example, if a project has ns project.core, the tests for that ns would be in ns project test, or project.core-test, right? Because core test there, yeah. Remember that project.core as a namespace corresponds to the file project/source/project/core.cljc or whatever. This means that project.core-test is found in it's not guaranteed, but okay, let's see. Let me rewrite this a little bit. Project.core as a namespace corresponds to the file that, and then let me just write it this way. Project.core-test corresponds to the file project/test/project/core underscore test.cljc. Note the test dir directory. Note the underscore replacing the dash. These ideas are illustrated well in the Instaparse project, which I should link just because, right? So Instaparse, copy that, but can of course be seen in many well-designed Clojure projects. Perfect. Okay. Setup. Right, so now that I'm doing that, this I don't even know if I need it, but let me figure a few things out there. Okay, so I've got, well actually, while I'm looking at someone else's code here for a moment, see if I look at there's all kinds of stuff in this project file. Just at the base dependencies here, they only depend on Clojure, right? And if I look at different profiles, they have different dependencies, right? Based on versions, which is smart and really cool, actually. So here they've got Clojure and Clojure script dependencies, which makes sense. If I look through, so there's those profiles, and then there's aliases, which are, I believe, just related to how you call things in the command line, or in the terminal, I should say. Okay, so what I'm looking for is an explicit dependency on Clojure.test, but as it turns out, I don't think you need it. I think all you have to do is pull it in your namespace. So if I do rbg.core-test here, and I require, I'm pretty sure I'm supposed to require in the core namespace, so let me just test that, or see if that makes sense in no, not source. If I go to their test folder here, Instaparse, core test, pardon me. So, okay, require Clojure test, CLJS test, right? In this case, I'm just going to begin with only the Clojure test. There's a few things here, right? So they do require in instaparse.core, right? So by this layout, I would have to do require Clojure.test refer. I'm going to refer all. Actually, let me do it this way. I know I'll need def test, and I know I'll need is. I do believe there's also, let's see. Let's just do it this way. We'll refer all. No real reason not to. I think that's right. And then I also want to refer rbg.core as rbg. That should work, yeah. I think that makes sense. That's reasonable. And then since I'm tangling things directly, I'm going to save that into dot test rbg core underscore test dot cljc. Now let me just double check that that's actually in cd test list cdrbg list core test vim, and it does contain what I tangled, which is of course expected and good. Perfect. Okay, so we've got a namespace there. Although I'm realizing I should theoretically do the test namespace as like a sub, something like this. Right? I think that kind of makes sense. Right? If I want to be just writing tests kind of as I go, then I can tangle them always into the proper file and still do things properly that way. Does that make any sense? So what I mean, well, let me back up a moment. Okay, now, so I have the test file, and now I may as well start the REPL. And I may as well then load the test namespace into, like, start up the test namespace. Let me write another note here. Set up when creating the namespace declaration for your test namespace, it generally will require you to you'll most likely at minimum need to require Clojure.test project.namespace being tested. There. Sure. Okay, so I've got this here. If I now, well, first off, if I save this, it still tangles 10 pieces of code, which is right. And if I go and split that and write is, we'll just do this, is equal to 5 plus 2, that's wrong. We know this. But if I tangle that, so there's 11 pieces of code, which makes sense because there's this other code block. Then if I load file, test /rbg/core_test.cljc, So what just happened there was it ran, like it loaded this namespace and then ran this line, right? So then it shows that it failed here, which makes total sense because it expected this expression to be equal to 5, but it's not, obviously it's equal to 4. So if I do this, save it, tangled 11 code blocks, and then I load the file again, it should result in true, which is good. So now I can just pop that namespace in there. So now I'm in the namespace, and if I run this in there, the same thing happens. It's true, which is perfect. So now what I can start to do is play around in the REPL here for a minute, just so I understand a few things. So basics, the idea behind unit testing in general is to write code that asserts certain aspects of a unit. In functional programming, it is arguably the case that the units of code to test are functions themselves. This is fairly well, okay, that's good enough. So Clojure, I don't need to put a, that's fine for now. Right, so the basics. Right, so in Clojure.test, the is macro is the basis for allowing you to, the is macro is, lets you write these assertions for any arbitrary expression. Yeah, okay, that's good. So oh boy. So obviously some of the basics here. These should all work, right? I'm not going to copy them, I'm going to type them out myself. If I do is, let's change it up. Let's do, if it's true that the number 4 is greater than 3, true. But if we swap it around here, 3 greater than 4, it should assert fail, right? Expected this, actual is that, of course, so that makes sense. And is dot starts with Adam, starts with an A, true. Does not start with an M. Yeah, nice and simple. True, yeah. Okay, those are trivially obvious, right? Pretty straightforward. And really, I don't need to be testing things like that. That doesn't make a lot of sense to waste your time writing those sort of trivial things, right? The cool thing is it's a macro, right? And it actually runs the result immediately, which is cool. Let me just double check one thing here. Right, so I just had to check that this was actually showing up in my REPL. So it fails, it gives the expected and the actual, and then it actually does return, like it runs this expression, which if I put it in there, just returns false like you see here. So that's good. That all makes sense. Things are looking okay. Just this is a brief tangent. My my bit rate was, but it looks relatively stable, so that's okay. Okay. There are two assertions for testing exceptions. So that's useful if you need to test that a function fails in an appropriate case, right? So this is an arithmetic exception. You can't divide by 0. Does that that's not what I expected actually. Oh, but right, so when you just run it, right, it gives you, it throws the exception. But if you assert is thrown, actually what happens if I take off the is? That won't work, will it? Yeah. Right. Yeah, so does that count as a passing test? Okay. Well, so let me see this one. This is thrown with message. Checks further if the message matches, right? Okay. I kind of thought it would just not print anything because the test is passing, but I'll see if there's stuff about that later on. So it takes a section as an optional second argument, a string describing the assertion. So this message will be included in the error report. Okay, so that seems important. Basics. When using the is macro to create assertions, you can and probably should provide a second argument which is a string describing the assertion. Right, so let's do that. Is equal to and 1. Obviously it's not. Obviously not equal. Right, so the message shows up here. What if I do it with this? New line, just for kicks. Yeah. Okay. yeah, it just is printing text, so nothing wrong with that. So you can also document groups of assertions with the testing macro, which takes a string followed by any number of assertions. The string will be included in failure reports. Okay. The testing macro lets you group assertions together. Testing takes a string and any number of assertions. When you run it, it will right. When you run it, it will create a report of all assertions with the testing string labeling that group of tests. You can nest testing calls, but you must call them inside a def test or a with test. Okay, right? So that does mean that this should fail. Is like this shouldn't work if I'm understanding things correctly. I also need to silly test, testing silly tests. Oh, so it actually did work. I don't understand why that would be, because it says it's not, but unless I'm misunderstanding the document. Right, so that does work. Let me do this. Should probably fail. Yeah. Right, so oh, that's cool. So it puts arithmetic with positive integers, like it just neat concatenates them properly on there. Arithmetic with positive integers. It fails both tests because they're float. I made them floats here and they're not integers anymore. Okay, good. Let me just remove this line because I don't get it yet. That's fine. Okay, so defining tests. There are two ways to define tests. The with test macro takes defin or def form as its first argument, followed by any number of assertions. The tests will be stored as metadata on the definition. Okay. So it does not work with def macro. I wonder if that's still true. It probably is, because that I think is the largest or the most recent Clojure update. So the other way lets you define tests separately in a different namespace. So with test kind of seems like I don't need it, because it's like you wrap your functions in tests if you want to do them all inline, I guess. But def test creates functions named those things, which can be called like other functions. Tests can be grouped and composed, similar to the test framework, Practical Common Lisp. The names of the tests will be joined in a list. Okay, running tests. So, oh, that's cool. So you can actually run tests. Okay, so if I actually just let me do a def test ASDF, okay? And all it's going to be is equal 1 1 plus 1. Obviously, this is false. What have I messed up? Oh, yes, of course. Is equal 1 0 there. Def test. If I run ASDF here, it fails, which is what I expect. Now if I do run tests, okay, that's cool. So I could also, if I call it run tests like this and just do rbg.core-test, if I pass in the symbol, it should do the same thing. Yeah, and if I do it on just rbg.core testing, no tests in this file, like in that namespace at all. Sweet. Okay, that's very useful. Use def test to define tests as functions, basically, right? Let's actually clojure.repl/doc def test. Let's see if there's anything cool here. Name and body defines a test function with no arguments. Test functions may call other tests, so they might be composed. If you compose tests, you should also define a function named test nshook. Run tests will call test namespace hook instead of testing all vars. When load tests is false, def test is ignored. Right, so you could put all your tests in line and just have them turned off for different contexts, like a production release or something like that. Run tests takes any number of namespace symbols and runs the tests found in those namespaces. If you do run tests in the REPL, it will run tests in your current namespace. This can be useful for well, we'll just leave it at that for now. I mean, theoretically you want to be able to run tests like automatically, but I'll try to figure that out a little later. There might be something even in here. If you don't specify any namespaces, the current namespace is used to run tests in all namespaces. Run all tests. Run all tests runs every test in every namespace. So Whoa. That's a lot of stuff. There's one failure. Can I pull just the failure? Run all tests? I mean, I expect it to be the test that I contrived. Oh, okay. I see. Run tests, right? So there's a failure there. Fail. Oh, if I, let's try one more thing here. Run all tests. Testing, testing. There should be a big fail right here. Yeah. Yeah, okay. Cool. So it like creates a report kind of showing everything that was tested, and then in those spots that are tested it shows specifically the failures. So if you only want to see failures, that you have to run an emitting test from production. I guess there's no way to do that. Okay, so if you don't so by default, these functions will search for all tests defined in a namespace and then run them in an undefined order. If you are composing tests, you don't want them run separately. So in that case, you must define a function that runs your tests in the correct order. Test ns hook. Okay. Prevents execution of fixtures. I don't know what those are yet. Emitting tests from production code. You can bind load test to false when loading or compiling code. This prevents any test from being created. Okay. Fixtures, they allow you to run code before and after tests to set up the context in which tests should be run. So that probably means if you need to build some state or do some mocking or something like that, you could use fixtures to kind of set it up and tear it down. So, okay, a fixture, perform setup, establish bindings, call the function, tear it down, and clean up. Okay. Okay, this seems useful, but something I'm gonna skip for now. Fixtures. To run tests in the order you want, set up a hook function. Right, which looks like test namespace, hook, no arguments, test 1, test 2, blah blah blah. If you don't do this, tests are run in any order, as in you can't trust or guarantee the order that tests are run and reported in. So that might not matter. This might not always matter, but sometimes you need or want tests to run in a logical order. Fixtures, fixtures are functions. Let's see here. Fixtures are functions used to set up, tear down, context to run tests in. Could be useful for building up state for some kind of app UI, or could connect to a test DB, or could mock some data. Yeah. Yeah, leave it like that for the time being. So saving test output to a file, all test reporting right to the var test out. By default, it's the same as out, but you can rebind it to any print writer. So it could be a file opened with blah, blah, blah. Okay. If I do, does this actually print it? No, it just prints the object. That's fine. Okay. Advanced. I'm not sure. I'm gonna need to do that right now. The R function seems pretty cool. Let me do R, similar to is, but checks multiple assertions with a template expression. So let me see if I understand it. X, Y, right? So you do equals X and equals Y. So the assertion you're checking is that X and Y are equal. For the situation, if you do 2, 2, that'll be true. If you do 4, 3, that should be false, right? So you've got, yeah, so if I do 4, 4, that should all be true. Perfect. So I have to go to the washroom. I'll be back in just a moment. Okay. All right, so let's report. Is there a report? Right. Okay. Assert predicate returns the generic assertion code for any functional predicate. Okay, compose fixtures. Yeah, def test private, I think is, yeah, makes private var. Do report, add file and line information to a test result and call report. If you're writing to a custom assert expert method, call this function to pass test results to the report. Fine. Report. Run all tests, run tests, set test. Don't need that. Successful. Does that work if I just call something like this? If I do it like this, oh. That's weird. Okay, so that's not working the way I thought it was, but that's fine. I don't need it right now. All I really Okay, so let me see now if I could actually write a test for my RBG thing that is in some way useful. Let's just save this note here. Okay, so play around with the basics here. That works. Use the RBG project to practice writing some tests. Okay. This I've got set up already, and I've done this more or less. The only thing is run on every file change. Clojure, run tests automatically. Let's see. Yeah, another way, run them from the REPL. Yeah. Load it. Yep. Yes. Suppose I don't need to automate it for today, right? Test check, property-based testing library. Oh, let me briefly in test check library. Let's do here test.check. This is a different testing approach called property-based testing. Right. It is inspired by quick check. I believe that's a Haskell library. Yeah, it is. It just says, I'm just looking at the URL thing at the bottom there. Property-based tests are contrasted with example-based tests. Let me see here. Clojure.test, example-based testing, unit testing, and test.check, property-based testing. Then spec.alpha is contracts, validation, types-ish. And I think spec can also, I think it uses test check already. Like they're related to each other. That you can write a spec and then test, you can use exercise, which uses the test check stuff to generate tests or something like that. I don't know enough to guarantee that that's true. But this test generation stuff is not for today. It seems really useful, but not something I want to get through today. What I want to do is, is actually start writing a bit of tests, write some test work here. Let me actually go to GitHub and just pop open this is the code that I will be writing tests for. As a brief aside, this works completely in the browser. There's a interpreter that interprets code live in these things here and then prints the result here, which is really neat. I'm really happy with it. And this code is all derived, or it's all exactly the same as the code in here. So all of this is the same. The idea being that, you know, prose like this, all the text around explaining what's going on gets put into this document. This doesn't have any of that yet, but when I'm done streaming for the day, that'll be some of the stuff that gets updated. Anyway, so this whole library, it's just a silly little library that creates this random background in an SVG file, which in this instance I have injected directly into the page, into this canvas div, which is not always the safest thing, but it's just running client side, so if you mess up the stuff, you just run it in your own browser and it's fine. The obvious or unobvious weakness with this is if I delete this 5 and make it a 1, then it's drawing a line for every pixel and it can really bog things down very quickly. So that's something that probably I should have like a validation check on the generate background so that the scale can only be a minimum, or it can only be between certain values perhaps, which I actually have done already. If I go into the generator here, I have a pre that checks that the scale is 5. It just hasn't been pushed to the site yet. But if I paste it in there, now what happens is if this 1 gets deleted, or if I make this a 1, it doesn't run because the assert fails that the scale is not greater than or equal to 5. So now it works, and now it works as well. There, right? So if I do 4 or even 4.999, it won't work because it's not an integer. And 5 seems like a reasonable limit. Now, actually, now that I think about it, it should be related to the width and height values as well, because if you make them massive numbers, then the scale size doesn't matter anymore. You're still gonna have a massive grid size and slow down your browser as well. So this is probably not a sufficient pre, which maybe I'll put into here, and then I can write a test that asserts different throw. Right, it'll do that thrown thing that I have to look up what it means again, right? So it'll check an execution error or an assertion error or whatever it is, and that'll be a passing test to test the validation. So actually, while I'm here, let me start with that, because why not? Split this here. This gets tangled into test, core test, def test. What should I call it? Gen background validation test. Yeah, and then let's start with right, if we do rbg/gen background, right, you call it with that. What do you need? Well, let me see. Is it let's see here. What's a good way to write this? Let me go back here. Let's do is thrown, and we'll look at. Let's go back up and have a look at that thrown example. Is thrown arithmetic exception. I don't know if this will work, but we'll find out. And then I'll just run gen rbg / gen background, right, which is this function, with, doesn't matter, as long as this is less than 5, it should give me an error. So if I save this, right, I just realized that unfortunately I've got a def test somewhere in here. ASDF, which fails. So let's make it succeed just to be lazy. Oh, ASDF, it's a function. Okay, run tests. Oop. Okay. So I saved this. It did tangle. What am I actually trying to do here? Load file. Test rbg core test.cljc. Okay, so now it does have this, and if I do run tests, zero failures, one error. That's right, so this is not what I expected it to do. Let me let me just do this. Gen background validation test. Ugh, let's run it. Okay. So let's do let's take this, right, and we'll, okay, so let's make this instead of exception, let's do assertion error. Okay. Assertion error, which is correct. That's what I want. So if I do run tests now, there we go. Okay, ran 2 tests. The other test is I always forget how to unbind. It's not, yeah. Anyway, that's fine. If I actually do, if I do this, Css manager restart, I'll just reload the REPL because I'm lazy. Okay, so now if I actually do clojure.test/run tests, will that do something for me right away? Oh, it does. That's cool. But it's not running anything because I have to pass it the namespace rbg.core test. no namespace, and that's because I haven't loaded the file. Load file, test, RBG, core test, CLJC. Right now, if I run this, it should run one test. Ran one test containing one assertion. Zero failures, one error. Why does this show up not the way I expected? Well, so if I, let me get rid of that actually, because now actually I think one test, one assertion, zero failures, one error. Is thrown, blah. Wait a second. Did this not... There we go. Okay, it didn't tangle, or it didn't load it properly. There we go. Okay, so the test passes because this validation test is thrown. Let me fix this up a little bit. Right, so this is, if I write tests gen bg preconditions assertion. So that's that. But I could also just do is so if I do gen background, right? So if I go like this, now if I load file, source rbg core.cljc, right? It loaded the file. If I actually run gen background with 10.10.1, it should assert, yeah. Oh, right. So it asserts correctly that it failed, but if I run it with 5, it should work. And what I can do, I have a predicate here, rbg.core/hiccup, right? This thing, this should return true. So I could use that to test here. It's kind of messy, but maybe that's fine. Okay, let me actually write it this way. Is thrown, and then you write out what you're testing. Then you also write is rbg/hiccup, if you run rbg/gen background, let's do 555, it should work, but oh, is this tests gen background precondition assertion failure success? Is that a fair way to write a test? Could be. Okay, no failures. So that worked. Right, so if I do this, save that. If I scratch S Clojure here, if I just pop in load file and then this line, there, okay, now if I run, right, one error because I expected that this is a hiccup. The actual is an assertion error with the whole stack. Right, because this is not right. So if I save that and then rerun this, there we go. One test, two passing assertions. Sweet. Maybe I should just write this out. GenBG fails with scale less than 5. GenBG succeeds with scale greater than or equal to 5. See, this is something that is like a skill that just takes time, I think, to learn how to write tests that are actually useful. In this case it works, right? But is it ultimately useful to do that? Probably. I don't know. I don't totally know, unfortunately. But actually, let me just clean it up a little bit. Testing, gen background, validation, input validation on gen background. Okay, testing that. Okay, let's see that. Let's see what that looks like when I run that test. Okay, so it didn't fail. So it didn't show me anything, which is a good thing. Okay. Testing, fail in gen background validation test. Input validation on gen background. oh, here, this now. I don't need this in there. Fails. Let's rewrite this. Gen background. Testing gen background input validation. Right? This assertion error. Yeah, that's good enough for now. Okay. So, let me see if there's other tests in this area that make sense. Let me do this, generator tests. Okay, so generate the background data. See, here's an interesting sort of thing, right? I have generate background. And generate background data, which both have the same shape to them. Should they be one function? Perhaps. That's, yeah, I don't know. They don't need to be. But if they are, well, no. Let me just change this, though, to maybe generate data directly. Gen data. That should work. Save that. That should still work just fine. Let me actually here copy this and do let me just for safety load both files when I run this. Okay. Wait a second, why is that failing now? Oh, of course, because this I haven't changed back to that. Save that. Run that. No failures. Perfect. Okay. So that's good. Well, okay, let's go up here. Namespace. Test namespace and namespace is fine, right? I've got the normal namespace and the test one is under here. Color, I've got a bunch of pros there and HSL and random color. Is there an important test to write here? So what I have, if I switch to rbg.core and I run HSL string, so it produces a valid string See, so what I'm thinking is you could write a test here where you run this and you make sure that it always outputs this, but it's like it's a fairly obvious test, right? I don't know that that's all that helpful. Potentially random color is more helpful. I also noticed an inconsistency here. In Canada we spell color with a, oops, that's my bad, color with a U, but I forgot to put it here, and I could eliminate that problem by doing this. Rand call. The problem with that is it kind of reads like random column. Well, let's do that. Anyway, so there, now since I have changed the name of that, actually, no, let me not do that. Random color. There. I do need to find where I call color for a minute. I do believe that is in the generator. Here, random color. So let me save that, tangle it. Let me load the files and just see if things error out. If I go, if I just run gen background, since I'm in the namespace, and do 10, 10, 5, the random color should appear here. There's a color, and there's a color. Yep, so they're still working, which is good. That's my bad again. Okay. All right, so one thing that would be probably useful is something like, maybe like this. Greater than 0, 50, less than 101, false. Oh, it has to be less than, right? 500, false. Okay, so what I can do is make some let's assert. Let's do a pre here. Pre. And we'll just AND a few things together here. We know that H has to be between, actually let me just check this here, 101, false. Right. This has to be, H has to be less than 0 or greater than 0 and less than 360. S has to be 101, and so does L, 101. Okay. So let's run that. Does that work? HSL string. Right, if I pass it 200, 90, and 10, that should work. But if I do 400, it doesn't work. If I do 0, it should work. Ah, okay. I've actually written it wrong. So it can be 0, so it has to be less than or equal to. Is it true that h can be 360? I think not. I think 359 is valid here. And then this, since it's less than or equal to, has to be 100, right? So let me just, actually, so here, I want to try break a bad habit for a minute. Well, since I'm writing tests anyway, and I just wrote this validation here for this string function, why not write a test that tests all those things for me without me running them in the REPL? Split that. Core test, right? So if I call it color tests, yeah. Okay, color tests. If I do def test, HSL string validation, that's the test. Testing HSL string validation is, okay, so let's write the let me subdivide this a bit. Testing HSR validation throws yeah. Right, then I just have is thrown. Just like the generator one, I have assertion error. And all I need, okay, let's write a HSL string. Sorry, I was zoning out for a second there. Wait a second. I'm just realizing that I can use the R thing here. Think. Wait, let me think. let's see. Can I describe an R that works here? Right. So R HSL, and then for each of these. Oh, no, I need to do R HSL thrown assertion error string HSL. Let's see if this works the way I think it does. Right, and then all I have to do is, pardon me, let's do 400 50 50. There's actually a bunch of combinations that I could test, but we'll start with only one of each of these is wrong. So we'll do 200 200 50, and then we'll do 200 50 200. Okay, let's see if this works. Save it, and let's zip to the bottom here and run this. Something went wrong. Oh yes, of course. This has to be RBG. Save that. Okay, now let's have a look again. Hey, ran 2 tests containing 5 assertions, 0 failures. Sweet. Alright, well that's actually pretty helpful. Okay, so let's make these a little more obvious. Let's do 361, right? 50/50 is good. This one can be 0. This can be 101. 50 is good. Actually, let me be consistent here. 0 0 should all work. 0 101 0, right? And then 0 should still work, 0 should still work, 101, right? Save that. And then if I run it again, 0 failures, 2 tests, 5 passes, perfect. Right, now, so that's individually, right? Is that sufficient to say that I think that's fine. Let me now test the alternate here. Testing succeeds. My spelling succeeds, right? I forget. Doesn't matter right now. Testing succeeds, and then we'll run the same pattern here, HSL. Thrown? No, there shouldn't be a thrown. It should actually be succeeds. If I do how do I want to do this? RBG/hiccup. No, that's wrong. I can actually, let me just string. Is that a thing? True. Okay. So is string RBG/ HSL string, right? If you run it with valid arguments HSL, then it should be a string. Oh, and I don't need to wrap this in an is because I'm already inside an R here. So string. Right, so now 000 should all work. 360, 100, 100 should work. No, actually, let me change this. It should be 360 should fail. 359 should succeed. And then I'll do one more where it's kind of in the middle, 237, 50, and 87. Those should all work. Okay, save that and run it. Okay, they all work. So 8 assertions here, right? So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 assertions in this test. And down here, I have one assertion and then another assertion, I should say, which works nicely. So that's so far so good. So what I don't know actually is if this is really a good way to do input validation. I also don't know that it's strictly necessary to do because well, I was going to say I don't know that it's necessary because the only time where I call this function is here, and I guarantee that the inputs are already correct because I have actually hard-coded the inputs here in random color. So it's guaranteed. Now, it might be good to have this because if I were to, say, theoretically ever expand the library to allow a user to make their own colors without random colors, then this function might end up taking in user input, at which point you kind of do want validation, right? Or it could conceivably be useful. So I don't think it's a total waste. Now obviously the trouble is this entire code base, this entire project is a useless project, right? Like it's a trivial little background generator thing. It doesn't really do anything critically important, right? But I'm trying to get better at writing tests and actually thinking about things in that way. So, you know, it's conceivably useful in a generic sense for my own learning. So I'll call it good. It is exciting to see it actually running. It's pretty fun. I don't mind it. Okay, base attributes. I really don't think it makes sense to write a test for something that's just a def of hard-coded values there. So that would be kind of crazy to do. Here, the CSS Compiler, this might make sense to write a test or two for. So, actually, first, let me go here, git status, git add, git status. So I've changed the core a little bit and the org file, of course, and I have a new file, core test. So git commit added first tests, git push, okay, so if I go back here now, actually, let's view the code, refresh this, test, there we go. Okay, cool. So that code is up on GitHub now, the tests, and they work more or less. So that's a good starting point there. Let me just go back to this because it's fun. And while I'm at it, I am gonna once again get up, fill up my water, and go to the washroom. So I will once again be back very soon. Uno momento. Okay. Let me just arbitrarily, to completely relax my brain for a moment, run this until there's some colors that I like. So one thing that's obviously kind of risky in a browser environment like this, right? Just by default here, it's just rerunning the code every time you make a change, like you make an edit in the code here. And if you have this, right, it will rerun it. So if it's a side effecting function that could fill up your browser memory or whatever really quickly, you can accidentally put in numbers that are tiny numbers, right? So like this, I can show you if I do a grid of 2020 and see 1, right? Obviously the grid size is now 1 pixel, so it's 20 times 20 total pixel or total lines, right? And so you can imagine if you have a background that's 1920 by 1080 and you make it only 1 pixel, the amount of SVG string data is massive, and so it slows your browser down, all because you're typing in a new number, right? So it's not safe all the time, right? So like, for example, 1920 by 1080, right? It makes this huge thing, and that's fine, but you can imagine now, since the validation isn't on this page yet, I pasted it there myself, right? If you make this a value of 1, your browser's gonna freeze up because it's gonna chug all of that data, right? It's gonna do, if you make it a 1, it's gonna do right, 20, that line, that number of line elements in the SVG, and it's going to try put it into the DOM, right? So totally not what you want. Actually, while I'm thinking about this, this is the wrong side. This might be a good validation algorithm, actually. If you multiply the width and the height and then divide the scale, right? I don't want you could check that this number is not greater than some cutoff, right? So 4 is too small, but 5 is acceptable in this case. That could be kind of neat, right? And 50 is definitely fine. 10 is perfect. That's kind of interesting as an idea, right? So it's a dependent, it would be a dependent validation, right? So if suddenly you do a 500 by 300, right? Let's imagine, let's set 5. Let's set this as the number. Less than or equal to, right? This number, false, true, 4.99999. It shouldn't ever become true, but of course it does due to kind of errors, but whatever. True, false, true. But what you can do is, and see, this is where maybe it does fall apart a little bit. If I do 500 by 300, that's fine, but so is 0.1. 1 is, see, that's where already that's not quite what I'm looking for. So maybe that's not a good idea, right? Because even 0.5 even works, 0.25 doesn't, 0.45 works, 3.5, 3.75 works. Yeah, so it's a cool idea, but just this linear sort of thing maybe isn't what I need. But that's a big old tangent from writing some tests here. So what I do want is nice colors, which looks cool there. Okay. So let's see. This CSS, my CSS here, is based off of this library, no prompt / garden. It's a library for rendering CSS in Clojure and Clojure script, right, which I've written here, compiles hiccup data structure to CSS. So I thought it'd be useful to eliminate the dependency by writing my own CSS compiler implementation, which I have here. It's very minimal. This is all it is. So it's missing all kinds of functionality, like this here, no prompt garden has I believe it's a yeah, he's got quite a bit of functionality built into this library, which is great. But for the sake of getting it working on this website, or like in the browser like this, and for removing dependencies, I thought it'd be really cool to just make my own. And it's very tiny. Oh, I also rearranged the structure of the code slightly, or like I moved certain rules into different spots. Anyway, so it's a minimal implementation because it has no real crazy functionality. It does do this. So I've got, well, actually, let me see here. Let me make sure. So if I run my CSS on a, let's say I need to style a paragraph to have margin 0, right? That's the structure and that's the output. If I print line that to be a little easier to read. So that works. I don't know. I actually don't think this will work, but I don't remember. I didn't try too hard here. Yeah. So there you go. That's an example of already a difference, right? My minimal version doesn't know what it would mean to have 2 keys in a row like that. So it's not a feature of this. I also don't think that I have child selectors. I don't think I allow nested vectors like that. So what this would be here is this. Right. So that also fails. Right? So that's just to say the only functionality that I've written this for is simple, this thing, this tag or this ID or this class has these rules, these CSS rules. There's no nesting, there's nothing smart about it. It just emits the proper strings. That's it. That's the whole thing. So these prefixes and stuff like that, I also don't do anything like that. Mine is just extremely minimal, which I actually think is pretty nice. I might, as a note to myself later, actually, see if I can use my CSS minimal CSS compiler in my stylo library to remove one more dependency. Not that this is a bad dependency to have, like it's a great library, and it uses the Eclipse license, which is fine. But anyway, it'd be kind of cool. It's nice to have reduced dependencies. So anyway, that's all fine. What I think would be cool if I do an attribute to CSS, but what would be cool is to write a test for my CSS and see that it works. Okay. Right, so attr to CSS. Attr is attribute. Right, so in this case, this has to take the form, right? It has to be tag, like that, a keyword, and the value is something. So it gets turned into a string every time, so it can't be a symbol, it can be a number, or it can be a string like 40 pixels or something like that. But so I use a vector here, but it could also just be a list. Or you could even do apply attr to CSS. My brain remembers how to type things. So if I apply that tag ASDF, it doesn't matter. Wrong number of arguments. Oh, really? Oh, no, that won't work because it's not allowed to be destructured. Yeah, so if I actually, that's silly, right? If I did it this way, attr to CSS, tag val, right? Then I would be able to do apply, but I haven't done that. So here I have something, I have a structure, attr, that is required to have a certain kind of shape to it, but I haven't defined that anywhere. So I do wonder if I should, in fact, define that. So I can do that. I could just write a predicate that would kind of help. First of all, though, let me move this function, key to string, here. Let me make a little thing here. Some functions are useful in a few different contexts. For example, both the HTML and CSS compilers need a function that converts a key into a string. So I have here Clojure, Tangle, source, rbg, core.cljc, and this key to string thing, I'm going to move it into here. That should work just fine. And I don't really need it to have I'm just thinking oh, that's wrong. If I do rest, oh, that's not what I wanted at all. Apply string to that. Cool. So I realize I have string replace here. Now I think I have it in other spots as well, so it might be silly to re-implement it or to remove it, but let me check that for a minute. Oops, what have I done? Don't want to do that. I want to find s/replace. Right, so I have it in 1-2 spots only. So it might be kind of cool to eliminate it. if I can. Well, let me what happens if I do, oops, here, rest of, if I do that, yeah. Right, so I have to, right, so if I make this, let me write a new one here, key to string, right, of key. And instead of string replace, I just do this logic. Apply string to the rest of string key. Right, if I define that as key to string, and now I run key to string on this, there we go. That works. Now, is that really a better thing? I have no idea. If I do Clojure dot REPL slash source of string, does it use the same stuff that Clojure string uses? Pardon me, I'm a little tired today. Clojure dot string slash, actually I could just use s, Clojure dot REPL slash source of s slash replace. Right, so it's still using kind of similar stuff under the hood anyway, so it kind of doesn't make a difference. Oh, I also, can you time things? Yeah. Cool. So if I do time, let me do keystring 1 and keystring 2, just for fun. Oops. I wonder, I'm tangenting all over the place right now. Does time, is time a thing here in this context? Yeah, it is. Okay, well, that's sort of silly, but time, this whole thing. Tell me how long this takes. Neat. Cool, okay. I don't need to know this. I just don't need to know. But what would be cool is time, key to string 1, have to type it properly, of course, and key to string 2. If they're like even in the ballpark of the same, which they are, they effectively don't make it, it effectively doesn't make a difference. See that? That's my very, very rigorous conclusion. But I kind of like this implementation, key string here, so I'm gonna do that, key to string. I could write a test for it. because key to string, you might assume that it would do this instead, that this would turn into a string with the colon in front like that, but I need it to not have that. So I have this function to do that, but if I write a test for it, then people can see that that happens. Def test. Key to string. Key to string test. Naming tests is, well, let's just keep this one really simple. Is equal, if I do rbg slash key to string of the key Adam, why not? If the result of that is equal to Adam, then everything is, then it's good. Then it's all good. Not included in string result. Sure. Save it. Can you use equals on strings? True. False. Okay. So if I load those namespaces and run the tests, I should see only successes again, I think. Three tests, 9 passes. Perfect. All right, so that helper has a test, which is maybe unnecessary, but still kind of useful. It's hard to know sometimes, right? Like, people would know, so people can see, if they run or see the test here, they can see that this turns a key into a string without the colon at the front, but you can write that in documentation. You can write it as a doc string. So I don't know the best way to do that, right? There's a bunch of spots that you could put that information logically. I don't know which one's the best. Or if you put it in all of them and then you just end up like writing things out triple. I don't know. But here, it does actually make sense to do something like this. Turns key into key. Yeah, I need to do this. Let's see here. If I do that, key to string, if I do, well, now let's load the file. Let me just see if stuff is working the way. Okay. Clojure.repl/doc of rbg, of key to string. Yeah, okay. So that works. Yep, that's fine. Okay, that seems reasonable. CSS Compiler, right. So, CSS rule a CSS rule has to look like this. It can't look like this, nor can it look like this. It needs to have key and something here. It needs, and the something has to be a map. Oops, that's not what I intended. There. Right, so. So an attribute actually has to have the shape, right? If you take first from a map that's got A1, B2, then you get a vector with the key and the value like that. Right? It is a vector at that point, yeah? Right, so this is exactly what I'm defining as an attribute. So that's different than a CSS rule, which is, it looks very similar, but it's got a key and a map as the value, not just a value. So I'm just thinking if there's good tests for me to write for that. There probably are. But would it make more sense to just write some comprehensive tests for the actual compiler function itself? You know, would that be better? Should I also change it from my CSS just to CSS? Because I could. I also just realized, so this is a quick refactor actually. This here, my CSS, should have rule, and instead of the if here, oh no, if it's a rule, no, never mind. So I was gonna say I could make a do a pre, right, and then do this where CSS rule, right? But what it actually So what it's actually doing, right, is what I actually have it doing is here, rule is a single rule, and here, otherwise, rule is a sequence. Right, so it's a list of rules. Is there a better way to do all of that? Probably. So let me actually get back to the idea of what would a test look like. Let's start with the obvious thing to write. Test, core test. We'll do def test, my CSS test. Right, so the first test is equal. Let's just make sure that the format makes a bit of sense. If I give it something that's tag, and there's a map of rule value like that. Oh, this is not rule, this is adder, right? So is, if I run my CSS rbg / my CSS, that function on that data structure, does it return to me how do I s/ split lines? Oh, split dash lines. So if I split my CSS ugh, I'm tired right now. Tag key value. Oop. Oh, split needs another value, of course. Split lines. If I apply string to that whole thing, it strips it of new lines. But if I don't do that, if I do my CSS tag key value, right, they've got the new lines in there. But let me go ahead and say that maybe that's fine. Let me see that this test works. We'll go with that. I don't know if that's going to work. We shall find out. Did I write this properly? Yep. Yep. Okay, that's good. Now, let's run it, see if it fails or succeeds. One failure. Fail. Expected. Yeah, they're not equal. Righto, righto. Oh, because I actually typed the wrong thing. Tag adder value. If I do that, it should work. Yeah. Okay, that works. Neat. Let me run my CSS with an empty thing. So it does allow it. Do I want it to be an empty thing like that? It's not really bad, it's just unnecessary. But that's a rule to CSS thing. That's not a it's not really a problem with my CSS, the compiler itself, right? That would be right, because if I do rule to CSS of this thing, Oh. Here I can do some validation actually. Here I can do a pre rule. Of course I have to put that in the right spot. Cut, paste it in there, save it, and now, because rule, this should fail, unable to resolve symbol rule. CSS rule is what should be. Save it, CSS rule, false. CSS rule, true. Okay, so here, now, I can actually do def test rule to CSS validation test. Right, so here I can do is thrown, shoot, what's it called? Assertion error when you do rule to CSS of something that is not a rule. Let me see if that works. Boop, boop, boo, ba-doop, boo. Something went wrong. And that's because this, I always forget to do that because it's not in the same namespace, but I'm writing the tests basically right there, so it just tricks my brain. Css Compiler tests, save it, and load that. All right. Sweet. That's cool. So that does mean technically now, right? My CSS if I do this, I will get an error, but it's not the right error. Ah, okay. Right, because what's happening right now is it's failing this. So instead of running rule to CSS, it runs apply string concatenate map my CSS to rule. So what I need it to be is I need a stronger There's almost certainly a better way to write this out, actually. It's not coming to my mind, though. Right, so I'm running into this problem, right, where it's not a CSS rule. So I assumed by default that, well, if you're failing that, it's not a CSS rule, that means it's some kind of sequence or a list, right? And then it assumes that the next thing there will be sequable. So I do need another. Oh, I could do if you do this, when sequable rule, when it's sequable, you do all these things. Oh. If it's not sequable, you do a nil. But I don't know that that's actually what I need. See, I'm not sure that I want it to succeed and just put an empty string, right? I think that's not the right thing to do. So I'll get rid of it, but this is still a problem. Right, because it doesn't matter. Well, there are situations where you can pass it bad data. I could also further restrict empty. Right, I could also do this. Not empty. Wait, is not empty not wait, what? Is that a core? Oh, I see. It's for filtering stuff or whatever. I'll just leave it like this. So not empty second item. Right, so CSS rule of this p empty is not a CSS rule anymore. It was before, but it's not now. So is that a good idea? Right? Because if I now run my CSS on p empty, I'll get an empty string. Let me also change this. Just make it just one liner like that. It's fine. It's easy to read. Well, okay, so we have a situation here where I'm not sure if I want it to fail on something like this, but I don't know that I need it to give an empty string. If I string together a bunch of empty strings, it doesn't do. Oh, okay, so maybe it's not bad. And doing a map cat on this is not the same either, I don't think. Although, let me see. Right, so my CSS of 2 this won't work because there's 2 arguments passed to it, but if I wrap it in a thing like that, then it works on both. Right, but can you do it? I forget if I... So this is kind of silly, right? Because it doesn't handle everything very well. Oops. I also don't want that in there. Right, so what it's doing, you can nest it all you want, right? It's just spitting things out directly. I also realize this should maybe have a double space like that. How do I where do I go? Where do I go for that? Right, so if I've got rule to CSS, this string tag properties, apply string to map attribute to CSS over the rule, over the map of attributes of the rule. Here, right, key to string of first here. If I do this, 2 spaces, now if I run that, there we go. They all have 2 spaces, which is cool. Do I also want to do I want them to have a double new line? It would be more readable. Right, so that would, I think it would pass a basic CSS linter, I think. It'd be cool to add a minified version, but those are all things for other days. So I'm really just trying to think through what would be good tests to run on this, if any. If I let me load, just right now, if I do gen background 100 110, and then if I do my HTML over that, It should still work. It looks like it works. Oh, I have to do a print line over that to pretty print it. Yep. It all still seems to work okay. Let me just double check, because the stuff I was messing with is this. See, that's interesting. It doesn't do, I thought I saved this. Right, so what I would expect is this to have a space there, because I thought I added an extra space. Well, let me see. Yeah, okay, there we go. So that worked now. There's an extra space that I don't need there. If I look at this, I no longer need this new line here, actually. And that should be okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Let me just write a few more affirmatives here. So this is testing just a single thing. This next one here, I'll just do is equal, and if I do my CSS tag 1 adder a here, let me make it a list, tag 2 b oh, this by the way actually will be failing now. Should do that, and then it should equal, in this case, a new string tag 1 and adder, oh no, and a value, nope, a, like that, semicolon, new line, this, new line, and then tag 2, like this, new line b, colon, space, b is the value there. This I should do like that, val a, val b, so that it's a little clearer to read here. Val a, b, val b, like that. New line, close brace thing, new line. And now, the moment of testing truth, save it. Two failures, fail, expected, and the actual. Huh, okay, well, let me run. Let me run it, my CSS on tag attr value. Oh yes, of course. That's a little silly. 2 spaces here, and then the value there. And this one, 2 spaces, and this one here, 2 spaces. That seems kinda silly. I wonder if there's like a string templating test approach that's better than this. No failures though. Okay, so this is testing when you pass my CSS just a single rule, or if you pass it a list of rules, and that's pretty good. And the rule to CSS validation test there is thrown if you do blah blah blah. Let me just do my CSS on something that's not a valid rule. It throws an illegal argument exception, which I don't really want it to throw that. I would rather have a validation of some kind, right? I could do defin CSS rules. You could map CSS rule over S, right? And that'll be a I'm just filter by CSS rule something like this. Fighter filter, it's empty. But if I make it a CSS rule, well, that's still not a rule, it's empty. It's all, that's empty as well, because it has to be in a list like this. Okay, that'll be I was thinking I could do this. If you filter with CSS rule, it'll either be empty. Is that gonna work? Or is it gonna Hey, it does work. Oh, I could also, oh no, never mind. I'm just thinking through how I would handle new lines in a different way. Probably there's a smarter way because they're hard-coded right here, but you could instead not tack them on the end of every rule, but instead when you map the rule to CSS over a sequence of rules, you just interleave them. But instead of interleave, so there's ones tacked on at the end, you do intersperse, I think. Intersperse. Oh, interpose, I think. Yeah, so if I interpose a dash between a collection of characters, apply string to interpose. Yeah. Right, so what would maybe make sense there is apply string to, if you concatenate right, yeah, if you do this instead. Interpose new line into that whole mess. Then you take this out. Let's see if it works. Okay, that's a step in the right direction. And you make a list. Hey, that did work, and that looks better. Okay, that's cool. So that means then that these tests should fail. When I save this and rerun the tests, they should fail, which would be what I want. Two failures. Right, which I expect now to be gone when I run it again. Zero failures. Yes, that is what I like to hear. Okay, see if I can make this look just a little cleaner. Interpose. Kind of messy. Let me just see if, so if I interpose, concatenate, filter. This is getting a little don't like it. It doesn't look good. Silly. Silly. Interpose. There. Alright, that's I'm just messing around with it for no reason. My brain is calling out for a break soon, so I'm gonna get going shortly. But I'm feeling pretty good actually about understanding at least the basics of doing some tests and how that's actually pretty useful. Let me do okay, so that should be reflected here if I refresh that. If I go view the code, look at this test, 25 seconds ago. Hey, look at that. That's almost starting to look as if I'm programming properly. Writing tests is not bad. It's certainly not bad. So the next set of things, well, so I'm gonna go offline soon, but I want to finish up this project in terms of adding just a few more tests that make sense for the CSS and the HTML compilers. Clean up the output a little bit. Maybe even eliminate a few more lines of code so that it's more concise in a nice way, and get this index file, this index.html, up to date with some of the validation and whatnot, so that it all tracks appropriately. So that's going to happen offline a little bit. Maybe not today, maybe tomorrow, but that should be fine. I feel really proud of myself today, actually. I read Clojure.test stuff, figured out how it works more or less, and actually added it into a project in a way that is actually substantive to the project itself. That, I think, is a really good habit to train, and I'm proud of myself for doing that. It's a little less exciting visually, but very useful as a skill to do, I think. It's certainly helpful to me. I'm really happy with what I've done today. So thanks for tuning in now, or if you're watching in the future, thanks for that too. I'll be back again tomorrow, and I keep saying this, but it is true. I want to get better at streaming and better at programming and better at design. Those are kind of the three main things I hope to get better at as I do these streams. So I'd love to engage with people who tune in and watch. Please, I mean, right now I'm leaving soon, but please send messages, send stuff on my GitHub, chat if you want. All that stuff is helpful to me. You can look at my channel page and click on my YouTube and stuff like that, and you can follow the VODs there, and all of that stuff is actually really helpful to me, and it keeps me going a little bit, you know. This is fun to do, but it is nice to get feedback, so that would be what I need and want. But if you're just there and want to watch and don't want to participate, that's totally cool too. Watching even is helpful. So thanks so much. I had a good day today. I hope to have a good day tomorrow, and I hope things go well for you wherever you're at. But I'm going to get going right now. Have a good one. Come on.